Okay, there we are. Okay, so let's make a start then. So good morning, everyone. And on behalf of myself and June, welcome to our first and hopefully last BAOT online steward seminar. So you know me already, but my name is Richie Lewis, and I'll be chairing this first session of the seminar today, and that's on NHS Pay and an update on Agenda for Change Terms and Conditions. Our speaker on this session is going to be Helga Pile, who is a Senior National Officer for UNISON's health team and one of our senior lead negotiators in our health group as well. So Helga's going to take you through a brief on the latest developments in NHS pay and terms and conditions for 2021, and also later on in the session seeking your views on priorities for the 2022 pay round. So as previously stated, this session is going to be recorded today. Please ensure you're muted throughout. Both June and I have control over your mute function as well. So if you don't know how to do it, we can take care of that for you. The chat box is going to remain open throughout the session, but if you could refrain from using it for anything but questions, that would be helpful, because June and I, who are chairing the sessions today, will be able to pick those questions out easier. If we run out of time on any session and that has unanswered questions, then if you email them to baotstewards@unison.co.uk, I'll put that email in the chat. That means we can get back to you because we have your email address then as well. So no question will remain unanswered, even if we don't get through it today. So with that, then I'll pass over to Helga. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Richie, and it's really great to be here, even if I personally would prefer to be in Warwick despite the coffee. It's always much better to be able to interact. So this is going to be a bit less interactive than we would like, but I'm going to take you through a presentation with some updates, and then hopefully plenty of time at the end for sort of questions, comments and reflections. So the only issue I've got at the moment is I thought I could move the slides on, but it's not working. So that's a good start. I don't know if, Richie, that's going to work at your end.
Yeah, I'll do it.
Okay. Thank you. So if I just jump to the bits to the next one, where I just tell you what I'm going to try and cover in the presentation. So do a bit of a recap on this pay round that we've just been through, and some perhaps offers some reflections on how it's gone. And I know we're not through it yet, but just to spark perhaps some comments and discussions from yourselves. Then importantly, to start to look ahead to the next pay round 2022-23, which is fast approaching. Spend a little bit of time rounding up on other terms and conditions developments that have happened this year and that we're see on the horizon, and then finish with talking a bit about how you can get involved, and just prompt you to offer some views and thoughts on key priorities for that forward-looking part. So what I should have said also is I sit in one of the BAOT seats on the staff council, along with Fiona, who I can see handily right at the top of my screen. So I'm sure Fiona will come in as well and add to and contribute to the debate as well, and put me right if I get anything wrong as well, hopefully. So in that case, I'll move on then to just start with that very brief recap of where we are now on pay. And there are 4 slides for this, with one for each of the administrations. So we'll start with Scotland because they concluded first of all the UK administrations. And you'll probably be aware that they had a negotiated pay settlement worth 4% overall, but with some flat rating elements to boost that for the lower paid end of the spectrum. But also importantly, we're able to negotiate the part of the joint unions claim around having an early pay rise. They actually achieved that by getting that backdated to December. They conducted a ballot of Unison BAOT members who voted to accept it, and they're now quite into the discussion on what 2022-23 will look like, and a likely move to continue with the collective bargaining approach as opposed to the PRB. So if we then hop along to England, again, you'll be well aware that the outcome of the very protected PRB process was 3% pay award, which was imposed and paid in September along with the back pay. You'll also know that we consulted members on that outcome during the summer, so not an offer that members could decide whether to accept or reject, but we wanted to know what they thought of it. So 80% of members who voted then in the summer said they wanted the union to oppose that outcome, but we had a silent majority, so 72% of members didn't actually vote in that consultation. So a silent majority, we don't know what they think, we don't know where they stand. So having considered that very carefully, the Health Service Group exec decided that they couldn't ignore that strength of feeling with that 80%, but the turnout was well below where it would need to be moving on to a formal ballot. So they instituted 3 actions. One, to consult branches around the turnout that they achieved. So each branch is being given the turnout that they got as a branch, and asked to comment on and assess how close they think they could get to 50% from where they were in the summer. So that's underway at the moment and will be reported back to the SGE later this month. They also did a survey of people who didn't vote to try and find out the reasons for that, because we as active trade unionists are probably the type of people who will always take part in these things, but it's concerning that we have so many members who on a topic as what we think is important as pay didn't take part. So we've done that survey, and again we're just working through the results of that and to report them back. But it certainly seems, from having had some initial looks at it, there's a large proportion of members saying that they didn't want to accept the 3%, but they didn't also want to take industrial actions. They almost wanted a third option, and they then decided they wouldn't vote on that basis. So that came out quite strongly. But what also came out quite strongly, as you'll be unsurprised to know, that obviously members felt that there were many other things going on in their lives that were of a higher priority. The pressures at work, all of those factors played into why they didn't actually vote at the time of the consultation. However, we do know that sort of half of members did actually open the emails. So if all of them had voted, we would have been able to hit that turnout threshold. So there's something there about, members just not being sure about the situation. So the third element of what the service group decided was to run an indicative industrial action ballot. So now the UNISON policy is to oppose the pay outcome, but the key factor is, do members actually want to take industrial action over it? So that is underway as we speak. I hope you will have all received your email with your votes. If you haven't, please search all your different junk files and so on and see if you can find it that way, because that's the easiest way that you can vote. And that's going to close on the 5th of December. And the service group has said that they're looking to achieve a 45% turnout. And if the majority then vote yes, they would move to a formal ballot. So we'll know how that is panning out by the 5th, just after the 5th of December. We'll know more clearly where we are. So if I then move as my tour around the UK, I'll move to Wales. So similar but different. So the Welsh Government also received the 3% pay recommendation from PRB, and immediately accepted it and moved to put it into salaries. The trade unions in Wales were concerned that the government hadn't kind of talked to them first about doing that. UNISON BAOT ran the member consultation in the summer, very similar timescale to the England one, and there was a 90% opposed rate. But again, that silent majority and actually a lower turnout in Wales than in England meant that you know, there wasn't a clarity about what they were thinking. However, on the back of the kind of approach to the government saying that, you know, unions would have expected the government to talk to them, there were then subsequently talks, and a package of improvements has been offered by the Welsh government. Those are primarily unconsolidated, so 1% unconsolidated for bands up to 5. One of the issues as well was that because the Welsh government does a living wage top up, real living wage top up, those members had not had the 3%, so they've put something in to fix that, and also offered a day's extra leave, and then a package of other measures around CPD and things like that. So that that offer has been made, and then there is now a further member consultation. It's due to get underway any day now, I believe, and will run until the 10th of December, asking members about that package of improvements. And the UNISON Regional Health Committee is recommending that the members reject that package. So we'll have to see how that one plays out. And then my final stop then is in Northern Ireland, which is a slightly simpler one to summarise, in the sense that there isn't actually a formal outcome yet. So the government there accepted the 3% recommendation, but hasn't formally moved to put that into practice. There are discussions ongoing about the financing and provision for doing that, and the unions are also then trying to explore whether there is scope to improve on that 3% position before the formal outcome is announced, and then there will be member consultation to follow that. So hopefully that wasn't too tedious just to go through that, but I think it's probably important that we sort of just get that proper roundup. So if then I just move on to sort of talk a little bit about some reflections on all of that, and I'm really just posing a few things that came to mind when I was putting this together, and hopefully you will come up with your own reflections when we get into the discussion. So, I mean, starting with that devolution picture, we've had obviously a devolved health as a devolved policy area for many years now, but and we've had different manifestations of that in pay terms, but I think just doing that roundup kind of starts to really cement the idea that we do have this divergence that is embedding itself within pay. So we have obviously the Agenda for Change is a framework, but we now have Scottish pay scales that have been ahead of the rest of the UK for some time, and we have a Scottish government policy which is to always maintain that Scottish differential as a policy point. Clearly there are issues around the politics of all of that in terms of a SNP-led government, but also that what looks to be a move towards collective bargaining and to not use the pay review body process anymore in Scotland. So these are emerging trends, but we're equally seeing that in terms of, you know, additional discussions in Wales and Northern Ireland. And obviously from an England perspective, we have a Westminster government, a Tory majority, a tough gig to try and get much out of them. It was really noticeable during the pandemic that all three devolved administrations provided some sort of, whether they called it a bonus or a recognition payment or whatever they called it, provided something, you know, notwithstanding all the issues that led to in terms of some implementation, but the Westminster government was completely unmoved on that. So I think that's something that potentially is going to be a trend that we will need to deal with and manage over the next few years. So then I've just tried very crudely to put a few reflections in the kind of negatives and positives columns. So I mean, I think it's probably the obvious place to start looking back at this pay round is the fact that the trade unions as a group didn't have a common position. So we had the kind of where we ended up was with a bunch of unions in the kind of double-digit percentage bracket, so the 12.5% and 15% positions, very much pushed by some sort of external pressure groups outside the trade union movements. We had those. We had kind of UNISON having this £2,000 flat rate position, which was more of a kind of intended to be an equitable and realistic, achievable position, and then a bunch of unions who didn't put a figure on what they wanted and were solely covered by the joint union early and significant pay rise position. So I think probably fair to say that in terms of maximising our ability to influence the politics and politicians, that's probably not done us a lot of favours. It's certainly caused a lot of confusion in terms of kind of media and public positioning, because the different positions tended to take up different kind of amounts of bandwidth on that. So I think that's one reflection. And obviously even within our own house, that we ended up with BAOT deciding that they would just go with the early and significant and Unison's 2K sort of alongside each other. And for those of you who are very integrated in terms of BA Unison branches, that probably felt a bit strange. I don't know that you'll comment on that. So that was one thing. I mean, I think the real other concerning thing was the delay and the dysfunction in the process. So we started really early on this. We wanted this to be settled early. We knew our members were going through and continue to go through incredible pressures, incredible things that they were doing and being expected to do, and settling pay early and in a positive way would have been so helpful to morale. But anyway, what we ended up with was pay not being actually put into packets till September, so 5 months after the due date, obviously backdated. But the whole PRB process was completely out of whack. It was well late than it should have been. The government put their evidence in late, and you'll all remember that shocking day when they announced that they were going to say to the PRB it was going to be 1%. They didn't do that till March, and that just meant that the whole process was something that we were kind of being buffeted around by. And right to the very end, they actually did not announce the final outcome until the final day of Parliament. They were literally, the MPs were literally sort of packing the suitcases to go on their holidays. And then even then, when it came to the ministerial statement on that last day of Parliament, she got up to the dispatch box, and where everyone was primed and poised to hear what it was going to be, she didn't announce it, and then they just put it out at 5 o'clock after Parliament had gone. So there was some real problems with how the process for the PRB for those covered by that worked, and I think as OTs, you probably were as frustrated as many others that a lot of the discourse, it was just constantly about nurses' pay, and we battled against that as much as we could with our one team messaging and our constant kind of reminders to people that the NHS is one team that works together. But that was incredibly prevalent as well. So those are some of the negatives, but there were some positives as well. I think we should acknowledge that 1% position was something that the government had thought through and was intending to see through, and it was only because we were able to mobilise such a backlash to that from both the public, from many of their own backbenchers, and it was a unifying moment, having had a divided position on claims, a unifying moment for all the trade unions to come together and really work against that. So I think it was thanks to those efforts that that 1% position didn't hold. Whether we think 3% was far enough to have moved it, 1% was something that was wholly unacceptable. I think we also did do some good work under the With NHS Staff banner, which was the Joint Trade Union kind of campaign banner, some innovative stuff. We had to really up our game on digital campaigning because of the limited ability to do stuff in workplaces for a lot of the year. And I think we kind of learned a lot about that, and were able to do some innovative things and to keep that conversation and that wider public engagement going with that. And as I say, throughout we have had strong support from the public, lots of celebs in media. Things are cutting through when you get like the Grammys and so on, and people are talking about NHS Pay. So I think that's something that was good, and I think something that we need to try, if we can, to kind of continue and to sustain. So that's it for reflections, I think, for the moment, just to kickstart your thoughts on that. If I then just say a little bit about the outlook for the next pay round for 2022-23, well, clearly, as I outlined, there are still active consultations going on in 3 parts of the UK on the pay round just gone. So it remains to be seen whether any of that will lead to formal industrial action ballots. There are a couple of other unions that are still in the throes of 21-22. So RCN are very similar to us, doing a kind of indicative industrial action ballot at the moment in England and Wales. We've got GMB doing formal industrial action ballot. We've got Unite doing something, not quite clear what that is. So there is potentially this very awkward position of having kind of 21-22 not concluded, but needing to also start working on the next pay round, because you're due your next pay rise in kind of a 4.5 months time. So we'll have to see how that plays out. I think the big headlines are clearly not a day goes by without discussion about the cost of living crunch, crisis, whatever you want to call it. Bank of England this week saying that they think that's going to last for 2 years. So that's something that I think is going to be really high in members' minds. And interestingly, that non-voter survey that we did, we asked people were there any things that had happened since that summer consultation that meant they might be more likely to vote now. And cost of living came out quite strongly in that, along with that 1.25% increase to national insurance that the government has announced since we had the summer consultation. So that's obviously looking very, very concerning in terms of what members' pay will actually buy them, and how much their take-home pay will be affected. One of the things that's really difficult at the moment is the volatility in the economic indicators. So we've got inflation soaring at the moment, but there's real division among forecasters as to how long that's going to last. Is it just a temporary blip? Is it something that will drop out fairly quickly? So I think some of that kind of gives us a bit of pause around how much we want to hang things on specific indicators, because we don't want to get caught out. We want to capitalize on the fact that we need a real increase and we need to have a catch up from what's been lost, but we don't want to find that inflation suddenly drops because something happens to energy prices or something, and then the government can just get away with it again. So I think that's going to be quite challenging for us just to map out how that pans out. And if that wasn't enough, we also now have a consultation on pensions contributions, which has been launched for the England-Wales scheme, and the other schemes are likely to do similar, to look at a package of proposals around pension contributions. Some are good, some are about fixing the fact that part-timers pay based on their full-time salary, and that means that they're paying proportionately more, and there's a proposal to correct that. But there are also proposals that would mean higher contributions for some staff, particularly at the lower bands. So that is also something that obviously we'll be responding to that, and we're running briefings for regions on that at the moment, but it's also a factor in terms of pay. So the other positive that's being proposed is around putting in some flex, so that the tiers, the pension contribution tiers, move with pay settlements, because as you know, at the moment you can have pay settlements that will tip somebody into a higher band. So they do propose to fix that, but there are some other things in there that are going to not to be good for members if they go through. So there's that to contend with as well. So it's going to be another busy year. But I think in terms of the politics of it, there are a few things that are going to be quite key. So we've got a government that's very happy to give out advice to sectors like logistics and parts of retail and hospitality, saying, oh, if you've got labour shortages, the answer is to pay people more. So that's really interesting. I wish they would apply that to the people that they're actually responsible for, but that certainly gives us some campaigning mileage. So the budget has just announced that nominally there will be no public sector pay freeze for this pay year, because as you know, outside the NHS, most of the rest of the public sector had a pay freeze. So but what's very unclear is if any funding provision has been made for pay. It didn't sound like it. So we've got that alongside the politics of this government trying to position itself as in the wake of Brexit as we've got aspirations to be a high wage economy. And again, you know, that just does give us some space to play in around, well, you know, that needs to apply to the public sector. We're falling further behind. We're now actually going to be below the statutory minimum wage in April, when unless pay is settled by them, which probably won't be, we'll actually need to top up just to keep the bottom of the structure legal. So that doesn't feel like a high wage economy when it comes to the NHS. So there's all of that for us to go at in terms of campaigning. But I suppose the one concern is that really brilliant public support there has been for the NHS and its staff. What impact will the mounting waiting list have on that? I know that so many families are in such tough positions waiting for those treatments and operations. And I think generally the public understand that the staff are doing absolutely everything they can, but there is just starting to be a little bit of a shift, I think, in some of the discussion around that. So that's going to be important context for us in terms of campaigning. So I'll just say a quick word about process. We know that for England, Cymru, Wales and Northern Ireland, the default is the PRB process unless we get agreement to do something different. But again, we have not had any movement yet to initiate it. We're well past the date where we'd normally already have put written evidence in. We'd be normally doing oral evidence around about now if the PRB were to be able to make recommendations that could actually be implemented for April. So it looks like we're going to have another year where we're well behind the pace on that. And obviously, as I said, in Scotland, they're starting to discuss having a negotiated process instead. So for 2022-23 then, if I just sort of talk a little bit in terms of kind of some of the UNISON pay policy positions. So the special health conference that we had in September passed a couple of motions which will guide the health service group executive in terms of developing the strategy. So there was this pay strategy motion composite that committed them to consulting members on branches on a pay claim for 22-23. Discussing joint staff side approaches with other unions, and you know, we can hope we can do that in a way that draws some lessons and some evaluation of this round. Also to restart what we had been going to do just before the pandemic hit, which was to run a consultation with regions around the future of pay determination, looking at the track record of the PRB, looking at the scope for whether we should change policy and try to move to collective bargaining. So that was brought to an abrupt halt by the pandemic, but we need to kind of restart that and kind of update it in the light of what's happened since then as well. But as ever, the motion committed us to use any pay processes that are available to us to advance our members' interests in the meantime. And in addition to that, there was a motion about the real living wage and asking the service group exec to look to embed that in agenda for change. So we know that that is there for people in Scotland and Wales, but not for England and Northern Ireland. The new rate will be announced next week. And that will mean that we're even further behind it once that comes out. So those are the sort of immediate sort of policy positions that came out of the conference that will guide that work. So I think that's probably enough just to tee up a conversation about next year for now. So if I just cover a couple of other terms and conditions developments. So in amongst all the focus on pay, there were plenty of other staff council things going on, probably most significant of which are the overtime and holiday pay corrective payments, which stem from a UNISON case in the ambulance sector, which found that members should have in their holiday pay overtime should be factored into that. So we got an agreement through the Staff Council, and there are parallel agreements coming through for Wales and Northern Ireland to put that right, and that built on work that Scotland had already done to deal with that issue. So in the September pay packets that people got all the back pay from the pay settlement, many people also got a perhaps unexpected amount of money, which was a corrective payment for them on holiday pay. So that is a real good win that was led by us in terms of the work on that. Significantly also, we've negotiated improved rights in the handbook on flexible working, so making it a day one right and removing any limits on the numbers of applications that can be made, putting in an additional kind of process that stops managers simply saying no straight off and puts in an escalation stage. So I think, again, significant, but not to underestimate the gap between something going in the handbook and actually real live flexible working opportunities for staff, particularly staff in kind of shift patterns where that's always been really difficult. So we've got a whole heap of work to do to actually drive the culture change that will make that actually more real for members. But it's to get that into the handbook gives us a platform for that. We've also, I suppose this is slightly oddly positioned in terms of a win, but you'll know that we were able to influence the provision of some special terms and conditions around COVID. So obviously, you know, full pay for self-isolation, full pay for COVID sickness. There have been various attempts along the way, as you might imagine, by employers to try and push for those to be kind of unwound. So far, we've managed to hold on to them. I mean, at some point, clearly they will go, but I think they were important provisions to give members some reassurance about how they'd be treated if they were to be affected themselves by COVID. So so far, those are still in place, and we've done work to support branches to deal with issues where employers haven't been doing what they should be doing. And we have also been looking at some banding work, particularly for support workers, bands 2 to 3, where people have been underbanded and started to be winning some kind of local agreements around that. So in and amongst everything else, those feel like important to remind ourselves of those. So we do have some commitments around negotiations to come in the Staff Council on bank pay terms and conditions. That was a commitment from the 3-year pay deal that again got delayed by the pandemic, but we will need to be picking that up again and working to try and get some sort of agreement around that. And home working has really come to the fore during the pandemic. It kind of overlaps a bit with flexible working, but it also is going to rear its head when people start to look at, can we divest some of our estate now that people love working at home, which I think is perhaps a contested area. Some do, some don't, we know that, but certainly there are terms and conditions and cost issues around home working that we need to kind of negotiate our way through. So that's on the to-do list. And then in terms of our kind of earnings max work program, we've got work that we've been focusing on banding, obviously the overtime issue in terms of overtime premium payment versus bank rates, and often people are shunted towards bank rates that are not as good as what they'd get on overtime. So there's work that we're trying to support on the ground there. And then obviously we need to be vigilant that the holiday pay calculations for the going forward are being done correctly. So lots and lots of work to do there. So I will now just say a little bit about how you can get involved, and I know many of you are heavily involved in this stuff. So first of all, if you're in one of the 3 areas where we're still doing the consultations on pay for 21-22, everything you can do to sort of encourage OT members to take part, whatever they think, whether they want to take industrial action or not. We need to hear from them, because we need to make decisions based on, you know, what members want and what's representative of that. So there's if you go to unison.org.uk/be counted, you'll find the stuff for England. The Wales stuff will be on the regional website, and the Northern Ireland stuff the same. But let us know if you need any more information about that. I know that there's loads of other things to do, but the flexible working opportunities feel like they're something that really could make a difference to a lot of our members. If they could get a work pattern that was better suited to them, they might make decisions to stay rather than leave. So I think if you're able to support members to try and make use of these new rights, that will be great. We've got a lot more coming out in terms of materials. We should have a member guide coming out soon, or a staff guide coming out soon. So if you can just promote that and get people starting to think about trying to use this, that will be great. Lots of work you can do if you've got any sort of familiarity with job evaluation or want to. We know that there are lots of OT members that potentially haven't had their job descriptions updated for a long time, that potentially could put in for banding reviews, but members are often very not aware of this, and anything you can do to kind of keep that awareness going would be brilliant. And then finally, if that wasn't enough, you know, there is that discussion and making sure that the OT voice comes through in terms of pay priorities for 22-23. So if I could just finish then by just looking back. So when we were in Warwick, and then that lovely environment, all together in a room, able to chat to each other, back in 2019, it seems an awfully long time ago, but we did a workshop. Peter and myself did a workshop with people who attended then, and many of you would have been there, just talking about, and I've just realised I've mislabeled that. It should be pay claim for 21-22, because obviously 2021 was the final year of the deal, so apologies for that. But so looking ahead to the pay round that we've just had, and we were at that stage just starting to do the very early thinking about what that pay claim could look like. And then we had some quite strong support for the keeping it simple, having one figure. Obviously, above inflation on all pay points was deemed to be very important to those taking part. Really strong support for that low pay measures there, around trying to get, you know, above the real living wage and embed proper measures around low pay. And then also some support there for having some sort of capping on the very highest paid, so that the weight of money could go to the kind of the bottom and the middle. So that's kind of what people were saying at that point. Again, it seems an awfully long time ago, and a lot's happened since then, but I thought that might be useful just to have a look back at that, in order to just to tee up a discussion about now. What do you think now? What do you think BAOT members would want us to be prioritising for this forthcoming pay round on pay? But also, are there other terms and conditions issues that are coming up for you that people would like us to try and work on, subject to capacity to deliver everything obviously that we're already committed to do? So I hope that sparks some thoughts for you. Thank you ever so much for your attention and giving me the chance to just run through all that. Hopefully we've got a good amount of time now to hear from yourselves. So thank you. Over to you, Richie.
Thanks, Helga. Okay, so I'll stop sharing my screen now, so should have everyone back in the room. So yeah, thank you very much for that, Helga. That was really informative and in-depth. There's lots and lots going on that we're still engaged in for this pay year, as we've just heard, as well as going forward for the next pay year. Has anyone, there's no comments or questions in the chat box so far, so if anyone does have any questions, feel free to put your hand up using the raise hand function and I can bring you in. Does anyone have anything to say or raise? Janice, okay, right. We've got a few people raising their hands here, so I'll take them in the order they came. So if we take Janice first, if you can unmute yourself and go ahead.
Hello there. Excuse me. Hello there, Helga. My name is Janice. I'm an occupational therapist based in Swansea Bay. Obviously, I've got concerns personally and professionally that the pay rises that keep on going up for the lower paid. But what about the 5 and 6 are really doing that? You know, the art grafting, the monitoring of band 5s, band 4s, band 3s. What is our COT and BAOT doing to support you know, this fight for band 6s and band 7s that are still, you know, clinically working and things like that? So could you answer that, please?
Thanks, Janice. If you put yourself back on mute. Helga, do you want to take them one at a
certainly.
time? Do you want me to take a few questions and then we can go?
Take a few at a time, yeah.
Yeah, no worries. Okay, so next we've got Suzanne Smith.
Hi, I'm Suzanne Smith. I'm an OT in Serona, which is BNSSG, Bristol North Somerset South Gloss. A couple of things. One, we've had some people experiencing an actual cut in their pay because they're already having to pay extra for, I think it's the pension contributions. So some of the lower banded people are actually experiencing a pay cut. And the other thing, the tricky thing about flexible working is, particularly in our area, which has been a cause of a lot of people leaving, there's been a big push for discharge to assess or home first, which has made 7-day working kind of commonplace and expected from any contract, and also covering a full shift. So you're almost getting a kind of hospital experience in the community. So that's quite difficult for people to be able to express a wish for flexible working. So people are kind of showing their feelings by leaving. So that's yeah.
Thanks very much, Suzanne. Okay, next we've got Peter Hewen.
Thank you, and thanks, Helga, for that. It's really difficult trying to sort of corral all the different scenarios in the 4 countries, isn't it? And I think the Welsh offer that's currently under consultation is quite a bit more complicated than your summary, but I think that's inevitable because you just need to give the headlines, really, don't you? But the regional health committee has taken made a recommendation to reject, and I think from the BAOT perspective, we're comfortable with that because I think this is what Janice was alluding to. The one-off 1% for bands 1 to 5 feels very divisive and contrary to the one team ethos, and a kick in the teeth, frankly, for the 6s and 7s who've worked just as hard during the pandemic. And that brings me on to the point I wanted to make about priorities for next year. Really, I was glad you put up that slide from the last Warwick seminar, because I think as a group of OT stewards, we've very consistently supported the low pay agenda, but I'm feeling increasingly from the feedback we're getting now there's a real issue around. We've said this for many years, but it's coming to a crunch point around OT staff who are stuck at the top of their band, and there's no sense of career progression, and even now, actually no incentive to take on those roles because you you know, you may feel that you're not being rewarded for them. So I think that would be a real priority, particularly in the context of what everybody's saying about actually working conditions now are worse than they were during the height of the pandemic, because we're trying to do catch up as well as deal with COVID, and the staffing shortages are nothing short of a crisis. And unless we can really get to grips with that, then I mean, everybody I speak to is basically planning their exit strategy if they possibly can. They want out. So recruitment and retention is absolutely crucial right now. And I think if people had some sense that their career was going somewhere and they were going to be properly rewarded for that, we would be doing a good job indeed. So I would put top of band and career progression as absolute priorities for next pay round.
Thanks very much, Peter. Okay, and next we've got Mike Griffin.
Yeah, just basically to agree with Janice and Peter on this, that we need to prioritise across the board pay rises and have a bit more of a focus on the 5s and 6s and 7s. The thing that specifically changed on this, I think, is firstly the massive problems with recruitment at those bands, and also just the all of the extra stuff that they've had to take on during COVID, which needs to be recognised. So I think I would favour a more across the bands approach.
Thanks very much. Okay, and Suzanne, sorry, I don't know if that was a hand left up previously or if you want to come back in on something.
Sorry, just another couple of things. Sorry. The other thing that I think is important is looking at the overall resourcing, because you can pay people more, but if they're absolutely on the knees, it's not going to do anything, and it'll just really get the public won't be supporting if they don't think there's any change, but people are being paid more. So I think we need to really press that. We need more staff within there, and that should be funded, because before we ended up hemorrhaging, before we started hemorrhaging staff, we were told flatly that the contract that was agreed, there's no extra money. So basically you've got to do all this extra work with your current resource, and then obviously COVID added to it. But basically we were saying this won't work, but they were saying there's no extra money. So that was the start. Now they're obviously trying to recruit because they've lost so many people. But I think that's really important, that you get the proper resourcing from the outset. And the other thing that is happening with us, because we're a social enterprise, the Flowers judgment, that hasn't been funded, particularly for social enterprises. And the frustrating thing is the government has been quite happy to farm out all NHS staff to these organisations, and then doesn't seem to want to appreciate that that's quite an anomaly. So we were all NHS, we had no choice, we were tupied into this big beast, and it's become an even bigger beast, and we're being kind of people are also leaving because we're under your normal contract. You might be expected to move anywhere within that area that you've chosen. So for example, for me, it'd be North Somerset. Now that it's a bigger organisation, there's an expectation that that would mean North Somerset, Bristol and South Gloss. So some people have actually effectively left because they're saying, no, I chose this job because I wanted to be in this area, but you're now expecting me to move on. So there's all, sorry, it's all very confusing and messy, but just to give a bit of an idea. Thanks.
Thanks, Suzanne. Okay, and I think we'll take one more then before we let Helga come in to answer. So we've got Sushil.
Thank you very much, Richie. We hear all this discussion. I think Peter is right, and Mike is also spot on the N6 and 7 about the pay rise. So they're left behind actually. Obviously, we've done the campaigning last year, 2K from the UNISON side. Also, we had a lot of discussion in the meetings how we're gonna take the approach to listen if the government can listen to us, but nothing's been happened. So I would just like to know this time what sort of approach and what sort of strategy we're going to look at into how we're going to do this pay rise for the next year for 22. Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much, Sushil. So I think that's everyone there that's had their chance. So Helga, do you want me to hand back over to you?
Yeah, sure, and thank you. This is really really useful to have this kind of discussion. So, in terms of the specifics of the Welsh situation, in terms of the non-consolidated, I think that's one thing. But the points that you were making about people at top of bands clearly has been something that's been around for a while, and I think also that issue of kind of so we got a certain amount of the way in the 3-year deal by removing kind of pay overlaps, putting in gaps between bands so that promotion would kind of come with some sort of premium, but that wasn't a finished piece of work. I think there's a lot more to do in terms of creating those promotion incentives and those bigger kind of payoffs for people taking on higher banded roles. So that's one aspect. Something that I think we're very unlikely to get through a PRB process. That's something that is probably much easier if we were negotiating and kind of reforming or continuing to reform the pay bands. So that's one aspect. I think the other aspect is, and I think you were saying, Mike, about the amount of things that band 6s and 7s have taken on during this. I mean, we have to get better at using the JE system, asking for job reviews and job descriptions and getting organized around that. So we've started to get some really good experience of doing that sort of thing, and I think kind of rolling that out to as many bands as we think there are issues is something that we really should do, because an annual pay rise is never ever going to be as much as getting someone put up a band. It's just never, you're never going to achieve that. So I think what you're all saying illustrates, yes, the annual pay round is important, but it can't be the only thing that we look at in terms of pay, and we have to have that organizing agenda. So that earnings max work program that I talked about, we need to continue to develop that. The capacity issues are such that it's not easy, but we've been doing quite a bit of work to try to raise the profile of job evaluation at local level, to try to promote people to get trained up to be sitting on panels. Because one of the experiences we've had when we've run kind of people asking for banding reviews, we've done that, we've got the members all organised, they've put in mass requests to do that, and then we've realised that actually we don't have staff side reps involved in the JE stuff. We've let that slip. So there's a lot of rebuilding work to do around JE, and we've already put out a sort of toolkit for branches about how to kind of re-engage on that. So I think what you're saying illustrates the different kind of types of work that we need to do. So we need to shape what a pay claim or a pay ask would be, but we also need to do all those other things that will perhaps make things a bit better for the people that you're talking about. Just coming to Suzanne's point about some people, the pay rise took them over a pensions contribution tier. Yeah, it's been a long-running issue. So as I say, this contributions consultation finally would fix that. However, it comes with a sting in the tail of other things in that package that would involve higher contributions for some people. So it's something we've pushed for a long time, because it seems very random, that, and because all this works on your total earnings, so people maybe do a lot of unsocial hours, suddenly find that they get tipped into a higher pension contribution and lose what they got out of a pay rise. So there's a fix on the horizon, but we need to try and kind of knock out the bits of that we don't like. Flexible working and 7 days, yeah, I mean this is kind of where, putting right in the handbook to say you've got these enhanced rights on flexible working comes into collision with the reality of people running services and just trying to sweat as much out of the staff as they can. And from what you're saying, that's happening in terms of kind of availability for working 7 days, but also working on a much wider patch. So I think that is very, very challenging. But picking up from what you were also saying, there's obviously clear evidence that people are leaving because they're not wanting to or able to work in that way. So we need these employers to look at this properly and go, well, look, the cost here is we're constantly having to recruit because we've got this turnover, versus, you know, if we actually sat down and tried to be creative and look at, let's retain people by looking at how we can work around delivering what they want and delivering the service, you know, it would just make so much more sense. So I think a lot of the work that we're going to be doing on flexible working is going to be trying to find those examples of where people have, particularly in the 24/7 sort of arena, have found ways of delivering it, so have made it work, have you know, introduced many more options for people in terms of shifts, have introduced self-rostering and all that. So we're going to be doing loads of work to try and, because I think that's almost the only way to tackle it, is to show those employers who just don't have the vision, look, well, these guys have done it, they've got the same issues. So we are going to try and work as hard as we can on that over the next sort of year around, trying to give that some reality. So in terms of kind of the other points you were making about the funding for social enterprise, totally, and we've got this with whether it's social enterprises or the contractors who do a lot of the facility stuff, the government does not recognise their existence when it comes to funding. So it's a real area of work that we need to kind of keep pushing away at. And also one of the other priorities that's been adopted for this year is to look at doing more around insourcing, so trying to actually demonstrate the problems with the model of outsourcing, the inefficiencies and some of that, and making the case that actually, you know, we've tried some of this, time to perhaps bring it in-house. So, you know, I know that's not much use to you, but you know, what you're going through is heard and recognised in terms of those difficulties in that mismatch between the funding. So we'll continue to work with you and regional colleagues to try and raise those issues. So to finish with, I think, Sushil, you talked about the strategy. Well, I mean, in a sense, that's what we're doing right now. So the service group exec will be having a meeting later this month to look at and evaluate the stuff that I talked about in terms of why those members didn't vote, where are we on turnout. Any kind of strategy needs to have industrial action as a possibility if we're going to kind of really have all the tools at our disposal. But I mean, you'll be aware that certainly outside Northern Ireland, everywhere else we've got that 50% threshold, which is really, really tough. So part of the branch consultation exercise is looking at, you know, where are we in relation to that? What is the prospect of being able to, if the members wanted us to, can we get to those legal thresholds? So that's going to be part of the strategy. What role can industrial action play in a pay strategy? Similarly, we, as I say, the exec has already had that motion tasking us to talk to other unions, so exploring the opportunity to try for a unified approach this time that we didn't achieve last time. So that's another element of strategy. And as I say, they will be consulting branches and members on what they want to see in any kind of pay claim. So we're at the beginning of developing the strategy, and you know, this hopefully is an opportunity for you to start thinking about and seeing how you can feed in, you know, via the panel and so on. So I think those are the main points, Richie.
Great, thanks, Helga. Peter, I can see you've put a comment in there about the PRB. I don't think we've got time to take it now, but it's a comment, Helga, about what's the possibility about moving away from the PRB in the near future. If you want, we can take that and we can get back after the seminar if you think that would be more appropriate. Is that okay?
Yeah, I think we can do that, but I think just to say that future pay determination consultation that I referred to that had been paused by the pandemic, so that motion tasked the SG with restarting that, and I think that is the opportunity to go into some of what you're saying there, Peter, in terms of the different options. So there's literally a stack of them sat by my desk behind me we produced a whole report that looked at the whole kind of PRB history, that looked at a number of different options. So I'm thinking that I'm just going to put a kind of little insert in the front of that and just say this is what happened since then, because it all stands, it's all there. It just got halted because of the pandemic. So I think that will be the opportunity in the process for us to have those kind of debates and flesh out what those different options would look like, because as you're saying, there are hybrid options potentially as well. So I think once we can just get that back up and out, we can start having those discussions, hoping that things will move in a direction where people have got a bit more time and bandwidth and ability to engage with that, because right now I feel like people are just on their knees. So we've just got to hope that we can create a bit of space and a bit of recovery so that people can engage with that.
Brilliant, thanks very much. Okay, so that is pretty much it for the end of the session. There is one comment there from Laura about whether people can vote using a link on social media rather than just email. So just for any of you who haven't yet voted, we have put posts out on our social media channels, which has a link to the NHS Pay website where you can vote. But it is a longer process. You need to put in details to identify yourself, where it brings up your individual ballot, and then you can register to vote. So you need to have those details to hand, which is why we prefer, simply because if you can find the email, it's quicker for you, where you just click the link in the email, it identifies you through that link. You don't need to do any of those verification processes, and you just click which option you want on your ballot. So it is quicker if you can do it by email. If you can't find the email, then we will be sending reminders out over the course of the next month. But yes, if you go on our social media channels, the link to vote is on those as well. Okay. So that's the end of this session. And so thanks, a huge thanks to Helga for that presentation and for taking those questions as well, and to all of you for attending and getting involved. Our next session won't be too far away from now, which will be chaired by June. I know many of you have registered for the next session as well already anyway. And I think that's everything to say. So I will leave you all go for now and see you at the next session, and I'll stop the recording in a moment. So thank you very much.
Thanks everyone.
Thank you, bye-bye.
Talk to you.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good day. Bye.
See you soon.